The challenge is laid out. The offer is huge. $500 just to stroll through some old house. How hard could it be? Obviously, you could really use the money. So, you agree to take the challenge. You stare up at the looming old building, and even before you ask out loud, what's the catch? You know deep down that you already know the answer. The catch is that the challenge isn't to just walk through some old house. The challenge is to walk through that house. You swallow hard, knowing, feeling in the pit of your stomach that this house is different. Different in ways that you probably don't want to know, which you are about to find out. Let me start by saying that Peter Terry was addicted to heroin. Insane way to start a story, but don't worry about it. We were friends in college and continued to be after I graduated. Notice that I said I. He dropped out after 2 years of barely cutting it. After I moved out of the dorms and into a small apartment, I didn't see Peter as much. We would talk online every now and then. AIM was a king in pre-Facebook years. There was a period where he wasn't online for about 5 weeks straight. I wasn't worried. He was a pretty notorious flake and drug addict, so I assumed he just stopped caring. Then one night I saw him log on. Before I could initiate a conversation, he sent me a message. "David, man, we need to talk." That was when he told me about the NoEnd House. It got that name because no one had ever reached the final exit. The rules were pretty simple and cliché. Reach the final room of the building, and you win $500. There were 9 rooms in all. The house was located outside the city, roughly 4 miles from my house. Apparently, Peter had tried and failed. He was a heroin and who knows what the fuck addict, so I figured the drugs got the best of him and he wigged out at a paper ghost or something. He told me it would be too much for anyone. And it was unnatural. I didn't believe him. I told him I'd check it out the next night, and no matter how hard he tried to convince me otherwise, $500 sounded too good to be true. I had to go. I set out the following night. When I arrived, I immediately noticed something strange about the building. Have you ever seen or read something that shouldn't be scary, but for some reason a chill crawls up your spine? I walked towards the building, and the feeling of uneasiness only intensified as I opened the front door. My heart slowed, and I let out a relieved sigh as I entered. The room looked like a normal hotel lobby decorated for Halloween. A sign was posted in place of a worker. It read, "Room 1 this way, 8 more follow. Reach the end and you win." I chuckled and made my way to the first door. The first area was almost laughable. The decor resembled the Halloween aisle of a Kmart, complete with sheep ghosts and an animatronic zombie that gave a static growl when you passed by. At the far end was an exit. It was the only door besides the one I entered through. I brushed through the fake spiderwebs and headed for the second room. I was greeted by fog as I opened the door to room 2. The room definitely upped the ante in terms of technology. Not only was there a fog machine, but a bat hung from the ceiling and flew in a circle. Scary. They seemed to have a Halloween soundtrack that one would find in a 99-cent store on loop somewhere in that room. I didn't see a stereo, but I guess they must have used a PA system. I stepped over a few toy rats that wheeled along and walked with a puffed chest towards the next area. I reached for the doorknob and my heart sank to my knees. I didn't want to open that door. A feeling of dread hit me so hard I could barely think. Logic overtook me after a few terrifying moments, and I shook it off and entered the next room. Room 3 is when things began to change. On the surface, it looked like a normal room. There was a chair in the middle of the wood-paneled floor. A single lamp in the corner did a poor job of lighting the area, casting a few shadows across the floor and walls. That was a problem. Shadows. Plural. With the exception of the chairs, there were others. I had barely walked in the door and I was already terrified. It was at that moment that I knew something wasn't right. I didn't even think as I automatically tried to open the door I came through. It was locked from the other side. That set me off. Was someone locking the doors as I progressed? There was no way. I would have heard them. Was it a mechanical lock that set automatically? Maybe. But I was too scared to really think. I turned back to the room and the shadows were gone. The chair's shadow remained, but the others were gone. I slowly began to walk. I used to hallucinate when I was a kid, so I wrote off the shadows as a figment of my imagination. I began to feel better as I made it to the halfway point of the room. I looked down as I took my steps, and that's when I saw it. Or didn't see it. My shadow wasn't there. I didn't have time to scream. I ran as fast as I could into the other door and flung myself into it without thinking of the room beyond. The fourth room was possibly the most disturbing. As I closed the door, all light seemed to be sucked out and put back into the previous room. I stood there, surrounded by darkness, not able to move. I'm not afraid of the dark, and I never have been, but I was absolutely terrified. All sight had left me. I held my hand in front of my face, and if I didn't know what I was doing, I never would have been able to tell. Darkness doesn't describe it. I couldn't hear anything. It was dead silent. When you're in a soundproof room, you can still hear yourself breathing. You can hear yourself being alive. I couldn't. I began to stumble forward after a few moments, my rapidly beating heart the only thing I could feel. There was no door in sight. I wasn't even sure there was one this time. The silence was then broken by a low hum. I felt something behind me. I spun around wildly but could barely even see my nose. I knew it was there, though. Regardless of how dark it was, I knew something was there. The hum grew louder, closer. It seemed to surround me, but I knew whatever was causing the noise was in front of me, inching ever closer. I took a step back. I had never felt that kind of fear. I can't really describe true fear. I wasn't even scared I was going to die. I was scared of what the That's not right. The alternative was. I was afraid of what this thing had in store for me. Then the lights flashed for a second, and I saw it. Nothing. I saw nothing, and I know I saw nothing there. The room was again plunged into darkness, and the hum became a wild screech. It screamed in protest. I couldn't hear this goddamn sound for another minute. I ran backwards, away from the noise, and fumbled for the door handle. I turned and fell into room 5. Before I describe room 5, you have to understand something. I am not a drug addict. I have had no history of drug abuse or any sort of psychosis short of the childhood hallucinations I mentioned earlier, and those were only when I was just really tired or just waking up. I entered the NoEnd house with a clear head. After falling in from the previous room, my view of room 5 was from my back, looking up at the ceiling. What I saw didn't scare me. It simply surprised me. Trees had grown into this room and towered above my head. The ceilings in this room were taller than the others, which made me think I was in the center of the house. I got up off the floor, dusted myself off, and took a look around. It was definitely the biggest room of them all. I couldn't even see the door from where I was. Various bush and trees must have blocked my line of sight with the exit. Up to this point, I figured the rooms were going to get scarier, but this was a paradise compared to the last room. I also assumed whatever was in room 4 stayed back there. I was incredibly wrong. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear what one would hear if they were in a forest. Chirping bugs and the occasional flap of birds seemed to be my only company in this room. That was the thing that bothered me the most. I heard the bugs and other animals, but I didn't see any of them. I began to wonder how big this house was. From the outside, when I first walked up to it, it looked like a regular house. It was definitely on the bigger side, but this was almost a full forest in here. The canopy covered my view of the ceiling, but I assumed it was still there, however high it was. I couldn't see any walls, either. The only way I knew I was inside was that the floor matched the other rooms. Standard dark wood paneling. I kept walking, hoping that the next tree I passed would reveal the door. After a few moments of walking, I felt a mosquito fly onto my arm. I shook it off and kept going. A second later, I felt about 10 more land on my skin at different places. I felt them crawl up and down my arms and legs, and a few made their way across my face. I flailed wildly to get them all off, but they just kept crawling. I looked down and let out a muffled scream. More of a whimper, to be honest. I didn't see a single bug. Not one bug was on me, but I could still feel them crawl. I heard them fly by my face and sting my skin, but I couldn't see a single one. I dropped to the ground and began to roll wildly. I was desperate. I hated bugs, especially ones I couldn't see or touch, but these bugs could touch me, and they were everywhere. I began to crawl. I had no idea where I was going. The entrance was nowhere in sight, and I still hadn't seen the exit. So I just crawled, my skin wriggling with the presence of those phantom bugs. After what seemed like hours, I found the door. I grabbed the nearest tree and propped myself up, mindlessly slapping my arms and legs to no avail. I tried to run, but I couldn't. My body was exhausted from crawling and dealing with whatever it was that was on me. I took a few shaky steps to the door, grabbing each tree on the way for support. It was only a few feet away when I heard it. That low hum from before. It was coming from the next room, and it was deeper. I could almost feel it inside my body, like when you stand next to an amp at a concert. Feeling of bugs on me lessened as the hum grew louder. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, the bugs were completely gone, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the knob. I knew that if I let go, the bugs would return, and there was no way I'd make it back to room 4. I just stood there, my head pressed against the door marked 6, and my hand shakily grasping the knob. The hum was so loud I couldn't even hear myself pretend to think. There was nothing I could do but move on. Room 6 was next. And room 6 was hell. Let me take a sippy. I closed the door behind me, my eyes held shut and my ears ringing. The hum was surrounding me. As the door clicked into place, the hum was gone. I opened my eyes in surprise, and the door I had shut was gone. It's just a wall now. I looked around in shock. The room was identical to room 3. The same chair and lamp, but with the correct amount of shadows this time. The only real difference was that there was no exit door, and the one that I came in through was gone. As I said before, I had no previous issues in terms of mental instability, but at that moment I fell into what I now know was insanity. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. At first I scratched softly. The wall was tough, but I knew the door was there somewhere. I just knew it was. I scratched at where the doorknob was. I clawed at the wall frantically with both hands, my nails being filed down to the skin against the wood. I fell silently to my knees. The only sound in the room was the incessant scratching against the wall. I knew it was there. The door was there. I knew it was just there. I knew if I could just get past this wall. Are you all right? I jumped off the ground and spun in one motion. I leaned against the wall behind me, and I saw what it was that spoke to me. To this day, I regret ever turning around. There was a little girl. She was wearing a soft, white dress that went down to her ankles. She had long blonde hair to the middle of her back and white skin and blue eyes. She was the most frightening thing I had ever seen, and I know that nothing in my life will ever be as unnerving as what I saw in her. A white woman jump scare. While looking at her, I saw something else. Where she stood, I saw what looks like a man's body, only larger than normal and covered in hair. He was naked from head to toe, but his head was not human and his toes were hooves. It wasn't the devil, but at that moment it might as well have been. The form had the head of a ram and the snout of a wolf. It was horrifying, and it was synonymous with the little girl in front of me. They were the same form. I can't really describe it, but I saw them at the same time. They shared the same spot in that room, but it was like looking at two separate dimensions. When I saw the girl, I saw the form, and when I saw the form, I saw the girl. I couldn't speak. I could barely even see. My mind was revolting against what it was attempting to process. I had been scared before in my life, and I had never been more scared than when I was trapped in the 4th room. But that was before room 6. I just stood there, staring at whatever it was that spoke to me. There was no exit. I was trapped here with it. And then it spoke again. David, you should have listened. When it spoke, I heard the words of a little girl, but the other forms spoke through my mind in a voice I won't attempt to describe. There was no other sound. The voice just kept repeating that sentence over and over in my mind, and I agreed. I didn't know what to do. I was slipping into madness, yet I couldn't take my eyes off what was in front of me. I dropped to the floor. I thought I had passed out, but the room wouldn't let me. I just wanted it to end. I was on my side, my eyes wide open and the form staring down at me. Scurrying across the floor in front of me was one of the battery-powered rats from the 2nd room. The house was toying with me. But for some reason, seeing that rat pulled my mind back from whatever depths it was headed, and I looked around the room. I was getting out of there. I was determined to get out of that house and live and never think about this place again. I knew this room was hell, and I wasn't ready to take up a residency. At first, it was just my eyes that moved. I searched for the walls of any kind of opening. The room wasn't that big, so it didn't take long to soak up the entire layout. The demon still taunted me, its voice growing louder as the form stayed rooted where it stood. I placed my hand on the floor, lifted myself up to all fours, and returned to scan the wall behind me. That's when I saw something I couldn't believe. The form is now right at my back, whispering into my mind how I shouldn't have come. I felt his breath on the back of my neck, but I refused to turn around. A large rectangle was scratched into the wood, with a small dent chipped away in the center of it. Right in front of my eyes, I saw the large 7 I had mindlessly etched into the wall. I knew what it was. Room 7 was just beyond that wall where room 5 was moments ago. I don't know how I had done it. Maybe it was just my state of mind at the time, but I had created the door. I knew I had. In my madness, I had scratched into the wall what I needed the most, an exit to the next room. Room 7 was close. I knew the demon was right behind me, but for some reason, it couldn't touch me. I closed my eyes and placed both hands on the large 7 in front of me. I pushed. I pushed as hard as I could. The demon was now screaming in my ear. It told me I was never leaving. It told me that this was the end and I was going to die. I was going to live there in room 6 with it. I wasn't. I pushed and screamed at the top of my lungs. I knew I was going to push through the wall eventually. I clenched my eyes shut and screamed, and the demon was gone. I was left in silence. I turned around slowly and was greeted by the room as it was when I entered. Just a chair and a lamp. I couldn't believe it, but I didn't have time to dwell. I turned back to the 7 and jumped back slightly. What I saw was a door. It wasn't the one I had scratched in, but a regular door with a large 7 on it. My whole body was shaking. It took me a while to turn the knob. I just stood there for a while, staring at the door. I couldn't stay in room 6. I couldn't. But if this was only room 6, I couldn't imagine what 7 had in store. I must have stood there for an hour, just staring at the 7. Finally, with a deep breath, I twisted the knob and opened the door to room 7.
Hi, Wolf. How are you? I love you. How was your game demos?
This is unprofessional reading. I couldn't read this well. Real shit, you should make actual ASMR videos. You have an amazing reading voice. Thank you. I used to do, reading for kids. Back when I was at the age of doing internships, TM. So, I don't know. I have a little experience. I stumbled through the door.
Wait, is this exactly where? Yes, it is.
I stumbled through the door, mentally exhausted and physically weak. The door behind me closed and I realized where I was. I was outside. Not outside like room 5, but actually outside. My eyes stung. I wanted to cry. I fell to my knees and tried, but I couldn't. I was finally out of that hell. I didn't even care about the prize that I was promised. I turned and saw the door that I went through was the entrance. I walked to my car and drove home, thinking of how nice a shower sounded. As I pulled up to my house, I felt uneasy. The joy of leaving NoEnd House had faded and dread was slowly building in my stomach. I shook it off as residual from the house and made my way to the front door. I entered and immediately went up to my room. There on my bed was my cat, Baskerville. He was the first living thing I had seen all night, and I reached to pet him. He hissed and swiped at my hand. I recoiled in shock. He had never acted like that before. I thought, whatever, he's an old cat. I jumped in the shower and got ready for what I was expecting to be a sleepless night. After my shower, I went to the kitchen to make something to eat. I descended the stairs and turned into the family room. What I saw would be forever burned into my mind, however. My parents were lying on the ground, naked and covered in blood. They were mutilated to near unidentifiable states. Their limbs were removed and placed next to their bodies, and their heads were placed on their chests, facing me. The most unsettling part was their expressions. They were smiling, as if they were happy to see me. I threw up and sobbed there in the family room. I didn't know what had happened. They didn't even live with me at the time. I was a mess. And then I saw it. A door that was never there before. A door with a large 8 scrawled on it in blood. I was still in the house. I was standing in my family room, but I was in room 7. The faces of my parents smiled wider as I realized this. They weren't my parents. They couldn't be, but they looked exactly like them. The door marked 8 was across the room, behind the mutilated bodies in front of me. I knew I had to move on, but at that moment I gave up. Smiling faces tore into my mind. They ground me where I stood. I vomited again and nearly collapsed. And then the hum returned. It was louder than ever, and it filled the house and shook the walls. The hum compelled me to walk. Welcome back, James and Maki. What have I missed? We're going through rooms at the moment, and we just went home and then found out it wasn't home. I began to walk slowly, making my way closer to the door and the bodies. I could barely stand, let alone walk, and the closer I got to my parents, the closer I came to suicide. The walls were now shaking so hard it seemed as though they were going to crumble, but their faces still smiled at me. As I inched closer, their eyes followed me. I was now between the two bodies, a few feet away from the door. The dismembered hands clawed their way across the carpet towards me, all while the faces continued to stare. New terror washed over me, and I walked faster. I didn't want to hear them speak. I didn't want the voices to match those of my parents. They began to open their mouths, and the hands were inches from my feet. In a dash of desperation, I lunged towards the door, threw it open, and slammed it behind me. Room 8. I was done. After what I had just experienced, I knew there wasn't anything else this fucking house could throw at me that I couldn't live through. There was nothing short of the fires of hell that I wasn't ready for. Unfortunately, I severely underestimated the abilities of NoEnd House. Unfortunately, things got more disturbing, more terrifying, and more unspeakable in Room 8. I still have trouble believing what I saw in Room 8. Again, the room was a carbon copy of rooms 3 and 6, but sitting in the usually empty chair was a man. After a few seconds of disbelief, my mind finally accepted the fact that the man sitting in the chair was me. Not someone who looked like me. It was David Williams. Me. I walked closer. I had to get a better look even though I was sure of it. He looked up at me and I noticed tears in his eyes. Please. Please don't do it. Please don't hurt me. What? Who are you? I'm not going to hurt you. Yes, you are. He was sobbing now. You're going to hurt me and I don't want you to. He sat in the chair with his legs up and began rocking back and forth. It was actually pretty pathetic looking, especially since he was me. Identical in every way. Listen, who are you? I was now only a few feet from my doppelganger. It was the weirdest experience yet, standing there talking to myself. I wasn't scared, but I would be soon. Why are you saying this? Just calm down, alright? Let's try and figure this... And then I saw it. David sitting down was wearing the same clothes as me, except for a small red patch on his shirt, embroidered with the number 9. You're going to hurt me. My eyes didn't leave that small number on his chest. I knew exactly what it was. The first few doors were plain and simple, but after a while, they got a little more ambiguous. 7 was scratched into the wall, but by my own hands. 8 was marked in blood above the bodies of my parents, but 9... This number was on a person. A living person. Worse still, it was on a person who looked exactly like me. David? I had to ask. Yes, but you're going to hurt me. He continued to sob and rock. He answered to David. He was me, right down to the voice. But that 9. I paced around for a few minutes while he sobbed in his chair. The room had no door, and similarly to room 6, the door I came through was gone. For some reason, I assumed that the scratching would get me nowhere this time. I studied the walls and floor around the chair, sticking my head underneath and seeing if anything was below. Unfortunately, there was. Below the chair was a knife. Attached was a tag that read, "To David, from management." The feeling in my stomach as I read that tag was something sinister. I wanted to throw up, and the last thing I wanted to do was remove that knife from under that chair. The other David was still sobbing uncontrollably. My mind was spinning into an attic of unanswerable questions. Who put this here, and how did they get my name? Not to mention the fact that as I knelt on the cold wood floor, I also sat in that chair, sobbing in protest of being hurt by myself. It was all too much to process. The house and the management had been playing with me this whole time. My thoughts for some reason turned to Peter and whether or not he got this far. If he did, he met a Peter Terry sobbing in this very chair, rocking back and forth. I shook those thoughts out of my head. They didn't matter. I took the knife from under the chair and immediately the other David went quiet. "David," he said in my voice, "what do you think you're going to do?" I lifted myself from the ground and clenched the knife in my hand. "I'm going to get out of here." David was still sitting in his chair, though he was very calm now. He looked up at me with a slight grin. Couldn't tell if he was going to laugh or strangle me. Slowly, he got up from the chair and stood, facing me. It was uncanny. His height and even the way he stood matched mine. I felt the rubber hilt of the knife in my hand and I gripped it tighter. I don't know what I was planning on doing with it, but I suddenly had a feeling I was going to need it. "Now," his voice was slightly deeper than my own, "I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt you and I'm going to keep you here." I didn't respond. I just lunged and tackled him to the ground. I had mounted him and looked down, knife poised and ready. Goodness gracious. He looked up at me, terrified. It was like I was looking in a mirror. And then that hum returned, low and distant, though I still felt it deep in my body. David looked up at me as I looked down at myself. The hum was getting louder and I felt something inside me snap. With one motion, I slammed the knife into the patch on his chest and I ripped down. Blackness fell on the room and I was falling. The darkness around me was like nothing I had experienced up to that point. Room 4 was dark, but it didn't come close to what was completely engulfing me. I wasn't even sure if I was falling after a while. I felt weightless, covered in dark. Then a deep sadness came over me. I felt lost, depressed, suicidal. The sight of my parents entered my mind. I knew it wasn't real, but I had seen it, and the mind has trouble differentiating between what is real and what isn't. The sadness only deepened. I was in room 9 for what seemed like days. The final room. And that's exactly what it was. The end. NoEnd House had an end, and I had reached it. At that moment, I gave up. I knew I would be in that in-between state forever, accompanied by nothing but darkness. Not even the hum was there to keep me sane. I had lost all senses. I couldn't feel myself. I couldn't hear anything. Sight was completely useless here. I searched for a taste in my mouth, and I found nothing. I felt disembodied and completely lost. I knew where I was. This was hell. Room 9 was hell. And then it happened. A light. One of those stereotypical lights at the end of the tunnel. I felt ground come up from below me, and I was suddenly standing. After a moment or two of gathering my thoughts and senses, I slowly walked towards that light. As I approached the light, it took form. It was a vertical slit down the side of an unmarked door. I slowly walked through the door and found myself back where I started. The lobby of the NoEnd House. It was exactly how I left it. Still empty. Still decorated with childish Halloween decorations. After everything that had happened that night, I was still wary of where I was. After a few moments of normalcy, I looked around the place trying to find anything different. On the desk was a plain white envelope with my name handwritten on it. Immensely curious, yet still cautious, I mustered up the courage to open the envelope. Inside was a letter, again handwritten. David Williams, congratulations. You have made it to the end of NoEnd House. Please accept this prize as a token of great achievement. Yours forever, Management. With the letter were 5 $100 bills. I couldn't stop laughing. I laughed for what seemed like hours. I laughed as I walked out to my car, and I laughed as I drove home. I laughed as I pulled into my driveway. I laughed as I opened my front door to my house, and I laughed as I saw the small 10 etched into the wood. It had been 3 weeks since I had heard any word from David. In the 6 months we started dating, we had only gone 3 days without talking, and that was after a pretty intense fight. It was nothing out of the ordinary. When I had talked to him last, he had just mentioned that he was going to check something out a friend told him about. But then I got a really weird text the night before. It was from David, but it wasn't from his number. It only had 5 words on it. No end, don't come, David. Something was wrong. After I read that text, I felt nauseous, like I was seeing something I shouldn't. I decided to get a hold of Peter, but I had talked to this ass before. He was a deadbeat, but at least he might have some information on where David might be. I decided to log on to AIM with David's account. I figured it'd be easier to start something with Peter if he didn't know it was me. When I logged on, he immediately messaged me. David? Holy shit, you had me worried. I thought you went to the house. What do you mean? NoEnd House, man. That place I told you about, I could have sworn you were gonna go. No end. This guy knew what was going on. Yeah, I actually couldn't find it. Maybe I'll try again tomorrow. What was it again? No way. You already had me worried. Fuck that place. I've been there. You do not want to go there. Ada, this is Maggie. Where's David? I don't know. I thought you would know, but apparently not. Shit. Ada, you need to tell me what's going on. I think he went to the house. It's outside of town, maybe 4 miles down from Terrence Street. Unmarked road, turn right. Fuck, man. He's gone. No, I don't think he is. What are you planning on doing? I'm going to get him back. I left the next night at around 8. There wasn't a single car the entire trip, and as I turned onto the unmarked street, I saw a sign pointing down the road. No end this way. Open 24 hours. My breathing hadn't been steady since I left my house, and seeing the house didn't help. There weren't any other cars around, which made me think that it wasn't open. Light from the front stoop illuminated the surrounding area, and the windows showed the lights were on inside. I parked my car, walked up to the front, and made my way in. Where is David? Shit, I thought I was here.
Hi, Dave. How are you? I hope you're well.
The front lobby was normal enough, but as I predicted, there wasn't anyone else there. All the lights were on, but no one was there. Besides the door I came through, there was only one other. Posted next to it was another sign. Room 1 this way, 8 more follow. Reach the end and you win. That wasn't what made my heart sink. That wasn't what stopped my stomach. There was no more below, scrolled and handwritten in red. You won't save him. I must have stood in that lobby for about an hour. I was frozen. I didn't know how to go on. Did I go through the door? Did I call the police? After reading the sign, I decided that I may have bitten off more than I could chew. I'm average height for a girl, but pretty thin. I wasn't about to fight off some psycho that was holding David hostage. I decided calling the cops was the best thing to do, so I reached into my pocket and opened my phone to call. No service. The house must be blocking the signal, and it was basically in the middle of nowhere. I walked outside the entrance, figuring I'd find service outside. I reached to the knob and twisted, and nothing. It was locked. I shook it harder. Nothing. It was locked from the outside. I slammed my hands against the door and called out to anyone that could hear me. I knew it was useless. No one was out here except for me. Then I felt a vibrate in my pocket.
I felt a vibrate in my pocket?
You mean a vibration?
In my pocket.
I reached down and looked at my phone. One unread text. At first, I was really glad that I had service. I was saved. Maybe the text was from David, that he was alright. It was from a different number. One I didn't have in my phone. I pressed open and nearly dropped the phone. You can't save yourself, either. My entire body was shaking. I wanted to pass out. I was stuck there. A cell phone with no service in a room with no exit. My eyes scanned the room and landed on the door across the room. A gold 1 was mounted on the front. It looked like a room door in a hotel. The ground felt far away as I walked closer to the door. In a few moments I was within inches of it, and I placed my head against the wood and listened. All I heard was just distant Halloween music. Just creepy instrumental music you'd hear at any haunted house. Suddenly I got a little calmer. David was always known for these pranks. He would call me about these elaborate send-offs he and his friends would make for the new players on the soccer team. That's... okay. You know what? I'm not even gonna get into that. Just getting the bros. Just getting the bros in with some psychological trauma. To, really get him part of the team. Killing their fucking parents to make him part of the team, Just getting them into it. Just getting them used to it. Somehow a smile found its way onto my face, and I opened the door without fear. Entering the first room alleviated my fears even more. The room was a completely normal attempt at a haunted house, though rather lacking. In each corner was a scarecrow, but not even scary ones. They were the kind you used to see in grade school, with the big smiling faces. Paper ghosts hung from the ceiling, and a fan in the corner added a cold breeze that made them spin. Next to one of the scarecrows was again the only other door in the room. Printed on the front, similar to the first door, was a large 2. I laughed and left this lame room behind me. Hold on, I need to cough. Wait.
I am die, thank you forever.
Just what me and the boys do, psychologically damage the new guy? Yeah. Give him a good old pat on the back afterwards and be like, you'll be right, don't worry about it. When I opened the door to room 2, I couldn't see 3 feet in front of me. It was completely filled with grey mist that smelled like rubber. I guess there must have been some fog machine in here, and I must have been pumping this stuff for hours. There were no windows in the lost room, so the ventilation must have been terrible. I walked slowly forward and let out a small shriek. I had bumped straight into a large robotic Jason Voorhees. His eyes flashed red and the knife in his hand went up and down in a jerky stabbing motion. My heart was racing, and if anyone was with me, I would have felt incredibly embarrassed. I covered my mouth and made my way past Robo Jason. The frog.
Peter, the frog is here.
The fog was getting to be a little bit too much. I was beginning to feel lightheaded as I found the door to room 3. I placed my hand to the knob and jerked it back in pain. The knob was extremely hot. I placed my hand on the door itself and felt that it was too warm. Couldn't hear anything from the other side. I put my ear up to the wormwood, expecting to hear fire, and heard nothing. I assumed that it was just a worm. It was just a worm. They did not finish that sentence, like they were pumping heat into it like the final room in Mr. Toad's Wild Ride at Disneyland. I took the corner of my dress and wrapped it around my hand, turning the doorknob as fast as I could, and I flung myself into room 3. There was no fire, just darkness, and it was freezing cold. Room 3 wasn't like the other rooms. It wasn't like the other rooms at all. At that moment, I knew something wasn't right. I tried to make out everything in the room, but I couldn't even see my hands grasping for the doorknob. It now wasn't there. I was trapped. I must have been turned around in the darkness, even though I didn't move once I entered. I must have gotten turned around somehow in all this darkness. At that moment, a light on the ceiling flashed on. A single spotlight pointed directly down, illuminating a small table, and on this small table was a flashlight. Even though I couldn't really see where I was going, I moved forward. The light on the ceiling was enough for me to make my way to the table. As I reached for the flashlight, I noticed a small tag attached to the handle. To Maggie, from management. The moment I finished reading, the light above me turned off, and I was again left in the dark. I fumbled with the flashlight for a second before I was able to turn it on. From what seemed like every direction, a low and rumbling hum surrounded me. My heart was pounding and I started to spin in place, dotting the beam of the flashlight all around me. There was nothing in the room, but after a while I noticed something terrifying. It could have been my imagination, but I could see a figure dart away at the last second whenever that beam of light hit. I began to panic. I started backing away from the small table, unsure of which direction I was going. The hum was getting louder, and I was starting to feel the presence of whatever it was that was dodging the light. My hand shook wildly as I frantically shined the light in whatever direction I could think of. It was always there, just barely escaping back into the darkness every time. But it was getting closer. My eyes started to well up with tears. I thought I was going to drop the flashlight. I was shaking so badly, until I saw it. The light set directly on a small number 4. It was written on a piece of paper and taped to a wooden door in the corner. I ran as fast as I could with the flashlight pointed directly in front of me. I could feel it behind me. The hum was getting louder, and I felt its breath on my neck. I was sorry. Putting thought and fought, like TH and F, next to each other at the same time fucking blue screens my brain every time I read it. Holy shit. I needed a second. I was sprinting at this point, only a few more feet to go. In one motion, I grabbed the handle, twisted it, and slammed it shut behind me. I was now in the 4th room. I was outside. I wasn't in the house anymore. What awaited me after opening the door to room 4 was what looked like a cave. I looked down to the ground and noticed something strange and disturbing. The ground wasn't made of grass or rock or dirt. It was wood paneling. It was the same floor as in the previous rooms. This was room 4. Somehow I was still in that house. There were a few torches mounted to the side of the rock surrounding me, and the cave beyond was pitch black. The torches looked like they could be taken down, so I walked over to the closest one and unsheathed it from its melting place. You'd literally have a flashlight, but sure. My body was covered in sweat, and I slowly made my way into the cave. The hum was gone, hopefully for good. No other noise met me besides inside the cave, but there was a slight breeze. The cave seemed to go on forever, and I was walking for what felt like hours, until I saw a faint blue light. I walked towards it, cautiously, but at a decent pace. The light was an opening, the end of the tunnel. I started walking a little faster. I always hated cramped spaces like caves and tunnels. In a few moments, the exit was within feet, and I knew it was at the end. And that's exactly where I was. The end. At the exit of the cave, the ground dropped off to a cliff, and there was no other way to go. I looked back into the dark cave behind me. I knew there weren't any turns. It was a straight tunnel. I turned and looked down over the edge. What I saw made my stomach turn worse than it ever did before. What I saw was an ocean, water all around with nothing else in sight. The drop must have been 100 feet, with a small rock formation at the bottom. After a few seconds of studying the rocks, my stomach turned more than I thought possible, and my body broke into a fresh sweat. The rocks formed a number. The rocks formed a 5.
Hi, Mello, I love you. I hope you're well.
I stood up and backed away from the edge. I hated heights. I was stopped by a wall that shouldn't have been there. I turned around and was met with a terrifying sight. The cave was gone. I was face to face with a solid stone wall, the side of whatever this mountain was. I had to keep telling myself I was still in the NoEnd house. I didn't leave. Clearly, this isn't an actual mountain, but it felt so real. I turned back and looked over the cliff again. There was no way. This house has been pretty messed up before now. I was outside, for God's sake. But what it expected me to do now was just too much. I knew what those rocks down there meant. That was the entrance to room 5. There were no stairs leading down, no other paths to use. I was trapped. Again. The house wanted me to jump. The house wanted me to jump. I sank to the ground and curled into a ball. I couldn't do it. There was no way I could jump off a cliff into a jagged rock formation 100 feet below. My mind was split in two. I knew that I was still inside, but my surroundings screamed in my ear the opposite. I stayed there on the wooden ground for a while. At what point, I'd lost all concept of time. After what seemed like weeks, I finally stood up. Slowly, I made my way to the edge of the cliff and looked down. The giant 5 taunted me to jump. It knew I couldn't do it, and it taunted me. And then the hum returned. A low and distant hum. It seemed to come from behind me, resonating within the mountain. I don't know what came over me, but after hearing that sound, something inside me lit up. I clenched my eyes shut and I jumped. The wind was rushing up as I fell, and a deep fear washed over me. I was going to die. I was going to smash into those rocks and die. They were going to tear me apart, and I was going to die. I didn't dare open my eyes, I just fell. Even with the loud wind around me, the hum was now deafening. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted it to be over. I just wanted to hit the rocks, and I wanted it to be over. And then I stopped. I wasn't falling anymore, but I never hit the rocks. I opened my eyes and looked around. I was standing on the familiar wood paneling of the house. The hum was gone and silence took its place. I had made it. I was in room 5. I don't know how it happened, but I was in room 5. The feeling of dread was gone. I was just incredibly happy to be alive. After a few moments to collect myself, I decided to look around the rest of the room. My happiness left me fast. This room was empty. The walls matched the floor, and the ceiling matched the walls, and the walls had no doors or windows. I was in a sealed box. And then I realized I didn't make it. I wasn't safe. I had made it out of the 4th room, but only to enter room 5. And there was no leaving it. At that moment, I wondered if David had been in this room. I wondered if he had jumped off that 100-foot cliff and ended up stuck in the room, and if he did, that means he got out. He wasn't here. I was alone. He got out, and I would too. The thought of David escaping this room gave me newfound confidence, and a second wind filled my spirit. I was going to get out of this room, find David, and get us the hell out of here. I walked around the perimeter of the wall and felt for any sort of inconsistency. Nothing. The walls were flawless, barely a scratch on them, let alone some secret exit. I started to knock at random places on the walls. They were completely solid. The confidence started to leave me. I was running out of ideas. And that's when she spoke to me.
You shouldn't have come here, Maggie.
I nearly jumped out of my skin, if that was possible. I was still facing the wall, and the voice had come from the middle of the room. The voice was that of a little girl. At least that's what it sounded like. I turned around slowly, and my eyes fell on who spoke to me. I was right. A little blonde girl, no more than 7 years old, with light blue eyes and a long white dress. She smiled at me and spoke again.
But now that you're here, let's play a game.
There was something horrifying about that little girl. She wasn't scary like those horror girls in those Japanese movies. She looked completely normal. If I saw her walking down the street, I would have just walked right on by. But looking into her eyes, I felt complete terror. Jumping off of a cliff was scary, but I wouldn't jump off 20 cliffs twice as high if it meant I could take back 1 minute of looking into her soulless eyes. Enjoy. Thank you, Sensei. I appreciate it so much. After a moment of staring, I finally spoke. What game? Who are you? I mumbled.
If you lose, you die.
If I win?
He dies.
My heart sank somewhere below my feet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but I knew she was telling the truth.
Which will it be?
She smiled. Neither. I don't know where I found the courage to talk back to this demon child, but I had come too far to just let David die. And if I died, this was all for nothing. No, I chose neither. But then I saw it. The reason the little girl terrified me, she was more than just a small child. Looking at her, I also saw what appeared to be a large man, covered in hair, with the head of a ram. It was a horrible sight. I couldn't see one without seeing the other. The little girl stood in front of me, but I knew her true form. It was the worst sight I had ever seen. Lamb cannon, shh, don't worry about it, shh, shh, shh. I love your model, thank you, I appreciate it.
Too bad.
And with that, she was gone. I was alone again in an empty and silent room. Only this time, something was added. A small table where she stood appeared from nowhere, as though I was there the whole time. There was something on it, but I couldn't tell from where I was. I walked up to the table and looked at the small object. It was a small razor, like one you would find in an X-Acto knife. I reached down to pick it up as I did, a scream left my mouth. When my hand came into view, I saw something that was never there before. It looked as though something was branded into my skin. A single number 6. I looked back to the razor and noticed a tag attached to it. To Maggie, from management. Thought you might need this. After reading the note, I started sobbing uncontrollably. Tears were rushing down my face harder than they ever have in my life. I had never cried like that, and I don't think I ever will again. I fell to the ground and sunk my head into the hardwood floor. I was sobbing for hours, just lying there on the ground, and then the crying stopped and the depression set in. I don't even know why I was crying. It wasn't about David, it wasn't even about how I was stuck here. There was still no doors in this room. I was still trapped. But that's not why I was sad. I was in the deepest depression possible. Complete and emotionless depression. I felt empty and clawed my way up from the ground and steadied myself against the table. My eyes fell on the razor and I picked it up. I was going to kill myself. I couldn't handle it anymore. I had had it. David was probably dead. I was trapped in here. It was over. I pressed the razor against my wrist, right above the 6 that had appeared on my skin. The sobbing came back and I just stood there, crying with the razor pressed against my wrist. David was dead, and I was about to die. Nothing mattered anymore, and with one deep cut, I sliced down my wrist. Immediately after slicing down my wrist, I was no longer in room 5. I didn't die, I knew that for sure. The depression was gone, but I was by no means happy. Tears were still finding their way down my face. The room I was in was similar to the one previous, and again, it had no doors. There weren't any lamps, but somehow I was still able to see everything clearly. The room was completely empty, but before I had time to think of what to do next, it went dark, and the hum from before returned. I covered my ears in protest. It was louder than it ever was, but it was over in a moment, and the lights returned. Only this time, something was added to the room. There, in the middle of the room, strung out by chains and naked from the waist up, was David. It looked like he was tortured. Knife wounds littered his chest and arms. David. I ran up to him as fast as I could. He was conscious. I saw his chest move up and down, but he wasn't speaking. And that's when I noticed what was etched into his chest. I dropped to my knees as I saw it. The 7 stared at me through as if it had eyes. Chat, can I be really honest with you for a second? Can I be so genuinely honest with you for a second? I'm about to out myself in ways that I didn't even think I could out myself for. I'm gonna be so fucking real. The reason why I yelled and was like, whoa, is because something got scrambled in my brain. And I read the whole like strung up by chains and naked from the waist up. After that, she yells out David. I genuinely I cannot even defend myself on this. The reason why I was like, whoa, is because I thought she yelled daddy. And I was like, that is an insane thing to whip out when you were in the middle of a psychological trauma session, bro. That is nuts. And as I read it, I was like, that is in fact not what that says. That just came out of my own ass. I can't even defend myself on that. Maggie's a freak. A little bit. Damn. She has prior experience in this circumstance. Good for her. Fuck. Damn. I can't even defend myself on that. I don't know why that happened. I heard David try and speak, and I got to my feet and got as close as I could to him. David, can you hear me? Maggie, what are you doing here? His voice was slight, but he was talking, and I was thankful for that. David, I'm trying to save you. How do I get you down? There were large padlocks in the chains holding him in place. I looked around the room for any sort of key, but all I found was a small knife in one of the corners. The metal was way too thick for that knife to even dent it, so I disregarded it as useless. I went back to David, and it looked like he was on the verge of death. And then I felt my pocket vibrate. It startled me, something awful. I took the phone out of my pocket. As I suspected, one unread text. I flipped open the phone. That isn't me. I didn't know what to think. David was right here in front of me, but the text was from the first number that contacted me. It was the first text I received from David that mentioned the NoEnd House. Maggie? I heard his voice clearly with my ears and my mind. It seemed like his voice was coming from all sides. Maggie, you have to go on. What are you talking about? How? I was face to face with David, or whoever it was that was chained up here. That knife. He made a slight movement of his head towards a corner. Go get it. And I ran and was immediately back with the knife clenched in hand within a few seconds. I had no idea what was going on, but I needed to save him and would do anything. Now stab me in the chest. What? I was shocked. David hung there, staring directly into my eyes. You have to run that knife through the 7 on my chest. It's the only way to save us both. No. I stumbled backwards. No, you're not making any sense. Maggie. He was screaming now. His eyes looked frantic. The side of his mouth curled into a crispy, twisted grin. Maggie, stab me now, it's the only way. I looked down at the knife in my hand. My head felt as though it was being struck with a bat. I was at a complete loss. I clenched my eyes shut tight and felt the knife in my hand. Maggie! And with a scream and a thrust, I stabbed the knife into David's chest. I don't know what came over me. I just knew it was the only way. I opened my eyes and I saw his face. It was terrified. Tears slid down his cheeks and David looked me in the eyes. Why did you do that? He couldn't fool me. I know that wasn't David. It couldn't have been, or else I wouldn't have been able to stab him. I know it wasn't. His eyes rolled back as the life left him. But that's when it changed. The seven on his body was gone. The blood dripped down onto the ground into a pool below me. The crimson liquid stretched out in every direction, the circle nearly filling the room, and I began to sink. I tried to move, but I couldn't. It was like quicksand. Blood was up to my knees now. As much as I tried to struggle, I just sunk deeper, up to my chest now. I clawed and scratched at the wood around me. The lifeless body of David hung above, his head facing me, smiling. The blood reached my neck. I was beyond terrified. Before long, I was fully submerged and fell into darkness. When I woke up, I was outside the house. I could feel the cold earth below me. I rolled onto my back and looked up at the night sky. The NoEnd House towered above me, complete with my car parked in the same spot. I wasn't sure whether I should laugh or cry. I was out. I was out. I got up and dusted off my pants. My body was still shaking as I walked to my car, but a feeling of uneasiness washed over me. There was no way I escaped. The house wouldn't just let me go. Something wasn't right. I knew it. I knew I didn't kill David in the 6th room. I knew I didn't. But he was nowhere to be found. I reached down into my pocket and took out my phone. No unread messages, but I had service. I flipped it open and began a text to David. "Where are you?" I wrote. Within a second of sending it, I got a reply. I pressed open excitedly. "Room 10, you're room 7. Run." And the deafening hum returned. I bolted. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't outside. I was still in the house. The hum rattled everything around me. It shook the trees and the air itself. Just needed to find an 8. I needed to find the next room. That was my only chance. I needed to find room 8. The first few rooms were obvious, but as I progressed, it was getting less and less clear where the rooms started and ended. I had no idea what I was looking for. Anything that had a number on it. I needed to find an 8. I needed to find an 8. Unread text. Your address. What the hell did he mean, my address? I slid the phone back in my pocket. The hum was growing louder and louder. And that's when it hit me. My address. 4896 Forest Lane. Unit 8. I slammed into my car and flung the door open. The hum shook the metal of the car and seemed to follow me inside. I floored it and made my way back down the dirt road towards my apartment. None of this was making any sense. How was room 8 my apartment? Should I have even trusted that text? It was from David. I know it was. There was no reason not to trust it. It took no time at all to drive to my complex, and honestly, I don't even remember driving. It was like when you zone out for a minute and wake up farther down the road. I didn't even bother locking it as I ran up to the front gate. My hands fumbled with the keys as I unlocked the bolt and made my way into the first hallway on the left. My complex was huge, but my apartment was one of the first ones on the left. I ran as fast as I could, past 4, past 5. My head was spinning. This night was weighing down on me like a lead vest. Past 6. The farther I made it down the hallway, the farther away the hum seemed to be. As I passed Unit 7, I could barely hear it anymore. And when I stopped in front of my unit, It was in complete silence. I just stood there, standing in front of my apartment. The small gold 8 was at eye level with me. I reached for the doorknob and slowly slid my key in, twisted, and the door swung open and I was sucked in like a vacuum, the door slamming behind me. Room 8. I got up off the floor and looked around. It was identical to my apartment. If I didn't know any better, I would have assumed that I was home and that this was just a bad dream. My mind went to David and wondered what room 8 was to him, what it was that the house showed him. I walked around and studied the area. Literally everything was exactly how I left it, right down to the half-eaten Chinese left out next to the sink. I looked over at my computer desk in the family room. The monitor was still on and AIM was still up and running. I walked over and sat in front of it, scrolling through my conversation with Peter. It was there, word for word. The house knew all of this, and how I had no idea. To be honest, I tried my hardest not to think about it. The answer no doubt something I was better off not knowing. I just tried to click out of AIM, but it wouldn't let me. The computer just froze. I clicked shut down, nothing. I clicked Control-Alt-Delete, nothing. I pressed the computer's power button, nothing. Then a pop-up appeared on the screen. It was a video chat. I looked at the list of people in it, and there were 2 names. Maggie and Management. The video feed was live, and all it showed was a grey wall. Then a message from Management popped into the text box. Hope everything is how you left it. Who are you? I responded. Enjoy the show. And that's when the camera turned. The camera focused on a young man strapped to a surgical table. He was completely naked and sobbing quietly to himself. The image wasn't that clear, but I thought I had recognized the man laying there. He was tall, with short brown hair and a fairly pale complexion. This is what happens when people try to cheat. And that's when I realized who it was, strapped to the surgical table. It was Peter Terry, and he wasn't alone. I don't want to describe what I watched at that moment. Screams, the sounds that Peter made were unlike anything I'd ever heard out of a human. I couldn't look away. I wanted to, but I think it was the power of the room. I couldn't look away. Peter let out one final soul-curdling scream, and I didn't hear it through my computer speakers. It was coming from my room. My heart sank as I spun around towards the hallway. I got up off my chair and I could still hear the screams emanating as I walked towards its source. I reached my bedroom door and the screams were now replaced by a hum. That hum. It had haunted me the entire time. I slowly opened the door and what I saw inside my room was what I had seen on the computer. There was a surgical table, with whatever was left of Peter Terry strewn across its top. No one else was there. The others in the room were gone, but a chill went down my spine. The management was here with me, only one room away. I walked closer to the table. The stench was horrific, and it took everything in me to stop myself from vomiting. I knew I was nearing the end. I had to be. I looked around the room. Somewhere in here was the entrance to the next room. I knew it had to be, and it was. But it was simpler than I had expected. Across the room, where my bathroom door should have been, was a simple wooden door, similar to the early ones in the house. Something was stapled to the door, something long and bloody. It was the entrails of Peter Terry, and they formed a 9 on the door. I felt bad for Peter, but I had gone through hell that night. I walked right past the table, picked up a long surgical knife, and didn't give the body a second glance. The final door was there, and I walked right up to it. This night was about to end, and I was coming out of that room with David, and I was going to stop whoever it was that was keeping him here. The door opened easily, and as I stepped through, I saw it was waiting for me. It was an empty room. It resembled a waiting room for a doctor's office. There were a few chairs lining the wall and crumpled up old magazines in a basket in the corner. Across the room on the opposite side from where I came in, there stood a single door. My heart sank when I read the label printed on the wood. It wasn't a number. It was a single word. Management. I clenched the surgical knife in my hand. I'm fucking ending this. They were on the other side of the door. I could feel it, and David was too. The hum was louder than it had ever been. I could feel it inside of me. It was coming from inside of me. As I walked, it got louder, and as I placed a hand on the door, the room was filled with the sound. I turned the knob and opened the door. The room waiting for me was not what I had expected. It was a front lobby. The same front lobby that began this entire hell. Only this time, there was someone behind the desk. My heart jumped out of my chest when I saw who it was. It was Peter Terry. Hello, Maggie. Peter? No, there was no way. How? What? Who were you expecting? A ghost? Satan? Some creepy little blonde girl? He was smiling. I wasn't. What the hell is going on here? Maggie, come on. Just think for 2 seconds. Who first told David about this place? You didn't... Who told you about David's whereabouts here? God damn it, Peter, you were his friend. I'm sorry, Maggie, but that's just how we run business here. Where is he? He's in here with the house, Maggie. He isn't going anywhere, and neither are you. I don't know what took over me, but I lost it. I jumped over the counter and shoved Peter to the ground. I grabbed him by the hair and I slammed his head into the ground, the surgical knife in my other hand pressed firmly against his neck. I wanted to kill him. I had to kill him. He killed David. He wasn't killing me. Maggie, you can't. There's always going to be someone to run the house. No. I slid the knife across his throat and slammed his head further into the ground. I don't think there will be. With his death, the room went dark. I could still feel the surgical knife, but I was no longer holding onto Peter's hand. I don't know for how long I was in the darkness, but it felt like forever. I stood and felt for the desk, balancing myself with one hand on the side of the marble surface. Then the lights came on. I could see the windows across the room. It was still night out. I looked out and saw him. David was walking around outside, completely unharmed. I ran to the door and tried to open it. I was so happy, but the door wouldn't budge. I tried my hardest, but the door wouldn't let me out. I looked out the window and saw David as he began to walk down the dirt road. I rested my head against the door and saw it, my stomach lurching hard. There, into my chest, was a name tag with one word. Management. And that's the end of NoEnd House, baby. What do we think? Do we like the it?